Hi, and welcome to Early Retirement Roadmap, the show where I help you prepare for and thrive in early retirement. Now, before I retired at 55 in December of 2024, there was one question that kept bouncing around in my head. What if I'm wrong? What if I retire early and in the future the market does something really ugly or healthcare costs much more than I anticipated? Maybe something comes up with taxes I hadn't planned for and missed, or inflation gets out of control. And then later in my life, at 82 or some other age, I find I have to go back to work to make ends meet. That is, even if I can find a job, because when you're much older, well, that's not too easy. Plus, can you get a job that even meets your needs at the time? To me, that's a very scary situation that I want to avoid at all costs, and I'm sure you do too. Because when you retire early and you're having a much longer period of years in retirement than the norm, perhaps greater than 30 years, the fear of running out of money is not some theoretical thing. It feels very real. And the fear of running out of money is so prevalent, not only before you retire, but also even irrationally sometimes when you're in retirement. And stay tuned as I'm going to talk about that part specifically at the end, that I felt a real need to create a dedicated podcast episode on this topic to share what I've done prior to retirement to tackle this fear and how that's helped me to put that fear at bay while living in retirement too. So, how did I get rid of fearing I'd run out of money? Well, I'm depending on 7 layers of protection I've set up. And that is the structure of this episode. I'm going to walk through the 7 layers I've set up in my retirement plan that help me get comfortable enough to retire at 55 and not have the fear of running out of money during my hopefully long retirement. And for your retirement planning, I think you need your own version of these layers if you haven't thought about them already. Because the goal is to have a retirement plan that can take a punch and still keep going. Okay, layer one is knowing my real spending floor. Now, this sounds basic, but I think it's one of the most important layers because if you don't know what it actually costs to live your life, then every retirement projection is built on a guess, and that creates the fear of running out of money because you don't have a solid foundation. And guessing is fine when you're choosing which line to stand in at the grocery store. And somehow I'm always terrible at it because I always end up in the longest one. But guessing is not great when you're deciding whether you can stop working. For me, the key was separating required spending from preferred spending. Of course, there are expenses I have to cover: housing, food, utilities, insurance, healthcare, taxes, car expenses. Then there are the preferred expenses: travel, hobbies, going out, home upgrade projects, things like that. Now, don't get me wrong, those preferred expenses are really important to me. They are a big reason I enjoy retirement. We don't retire just so we can keep the lights on and stay at home watching TV all day. But the reason I worry less is because I know which spending is required and which spending is flexible. If the market has a rough year, I do not have to live the exact same financial life that year. I can pause a big trip. I can delay a major expense. I can scale back home upgrade projects. I can spend less aggressively for a while. The point is, flexibility is a safety feature. A lot of people think retirement safety comes only from having more money. More money helps, obviously, but flexibility is its own kind of wealth. If every dollar in your retirement budget is treated as non negotiable, then every market drop feels like a threat. But if you know your floor and you know your nice to haves, then you have room to adjust to protect your wealth and have your money last through a long retirement. So that's layer one. I know what I need, I know what I prefer, and I don't confuse the two. And I know the amount I have for spending on both, especially the preferred or, in other words, optional expenses. Layer two is my cash runway. Now, this one is huge for me, and I think it's especially important if you retire early because when people worry about running out of money, a lot of that fear is really about one specific thing. What if the market crashes right after I retire. And that fear is legit. The technical term is sequence of returns risk. And the idea is simple: bad returns early in retirement can hurt more than bad returns later, especially if your portfolio drops early and you are also selling investments to pay your bills. You can dig a hole that is harder to climb out of. When you're still working, a market drop can feel like stocks are on sale and it's a great time to buy. But when you retire and the paycheck stops, that same market drop feels very different because now it's affecting a source of your retirement income. Same drop, but entirely different emotions. That is why I like having a solid cash runway. The purpose of the runway is not to beat the stock market. Cash is not exciting. Cash is boring. It doesn't have the large ups and downs of the stock market, but boring is what I want because the purpose of the runway is to buy time. Time to avoid selling stocks when they're down, time to let the portfolio recover, time to make calm decisions instead of panic ones. That is one of the biggest reasons I worry less. I'm not counting on selling stocks every single month, no matter what the market is doing. I have a great buffer. And for your retirement planning, I think you need some answer to this question. If the market drops hard right after I retire, or really during my retirement too in general, where does my spending money come from? If the answer is I'll just sell whatever I need and hope for the best, I think you need to rethink that. Hope is a very nice human emotion. It's a terrible retirement withdrawal strategy. This layer is so important to me that I created an entire podcast episode on how to build, store, and maintain a cash runway in retirement. And I'll put that episode in the description or show notes. Layer three is stress testing the plan before taking the leap. This one was a big one for me because before I retired, I didn't want to just look at one optimistic version of the future and say, it looks good, let's go. I wanted to know what happened if life got messy. What if there is an extended market downturn? What if the recovery takes longer than expected? What if I live to 100? What if healthcare expenses later in life are much higher than I expected? What if inflation is worse than I hoped? What if spending is higher in the early years because I'm actually using the freedom I work for? And believe me, my expenses are higher in my early years right now. I'm enjoying my life. I want to do all the fun stuff while I'm young enough to enjoy it. Those were the kinds of questions I wanted to answer before I walked away from work. One of the tools I used for that was Bolden. I'm a fan of it because it helped me build the plan, test different what if scenarios, and see whether the plan could bend if life didn't go exactly as expected. Bolden does have a free basic plan, so you can start there and try some what if scenarios without paying for anything. But if you want to go deeper, the paid Planner Plus version gives you more complete planning features, including multiple scenarios, side by side comparisons, Monte Carlo analysis, tax projection, and a Roth conversion explorer. And the great thing about it, you can try it out for 2 weeks before you even commit to the paid version. I used Bolden before I retired to help test whether I was ready, and I still use it now in retirement to keep track of the plan as life, markets, spending, taxes, and healthcare costs change. I'm also an affiliate for Bolden because I generally use the software and love it. There is a link in the description or show notes, and you can use that to check it out, and it doesn't cost you anything extra and supports this podcast. Now, I did not use Bolden because I wanted a piece of software to tell me I was invincible. Of course not. Nothing can foresee your exact future, but what it can do is help you see how your plan reacts when you change the assumptions. Now, that is what I cared about. I wanted to see whether my plan could bend. I ran lots of what if scenarios. I looked at the Monte Carlo results for those different scenarios. So, what's that? A Monte Carlo analysis basically runs your plan through many possible market outcomes and tells you the percentage of those outcomes where your money lasts through the plan. In Bolden's case, their Monte Carlo analysis currently runs 1,000 simulations, so it is not just showing you one neat little projection and pretending that's how life will go. So if a plan shows a 90% chance of success with the Monte Carlo simulation, that does not mean that is a magic guarantee, of course. It means that in the simulations, the plan made it through 90% of the scenarios without you running out of money. And even that needs context. A lot of professionals do not say you need a 100% score. In fact, many planners tend to think of terms of something like the 80 to 90% range, but I do believe this also depends on the person, their risk tolerance, the assumptions, and how flexible their spending is for what range they're comfortable with. And some retirement researchers also make the point that if someone is willing to adjust spending along the way, a lower score does not automatically mean disaster. It may mean the plan needs adjustments in some scenarios, and that distinction matters because I don't think the goal is to chase a perfect Monte Carlo score. A perfect score can sometimes mean you are oversaving, underspending, or working longer than you need to. For me, the goal was to see whether my essential spending was secure, whether my preferred spending had room to move, and whether I had enough levers if things went badly. And when I ran those scenarios, the plan came out strong. So that made me feel tremendously confident in my decision. And I really needed that because making the decision to retire is life altering. And I didn't want to quit my job and then discover I made a mistake and have to look for work again. I didn't want to be in a situation where I got a taste of freedom and then be like, well, that was nice for a while, but here I am again, back to work. So I still wanted another set of eyes before I took the leap. After all, I was really diligent about using Bolden, running different what if scenarios, using it to make sure I thought of everything. But what if I didn't? I'm only human. I thought it's possible I didn't think of something. So I also had a couple of financial planners review my situation. In my case, the great thing was it was complimentary for me because I have the majority of my investments with E-Trade, which is part of Morgan Stanley. And they were able to run my plan through their own tools and what if scenarios too. And that second set of eyes helped affirm what I was seeing on my own, that I wasn't going to run out of money and I had a plan that would bend with life's curveballs. And if you have a significant amount invested with a brokerage firm, it may be worth checking whether they offer financial planning reviews or retirement planning support at no additional cost. Not every firm does, not every service is the same, and you still need to understand what they are and are not providing. But it's worth asking, or if you don't have that option, consider paying for a fiduciary financial advisor, which is an advisor that has a legal duty to put your best interests ahead of their own when giving advice, not what may earn them the highest commission or benefits their firm the most. And I do an hourly flat fee, not someone that charges based upon your total assets. Because what I'm describing here is someone just being a different pair of eyes. Because again, we're talking about a major life decision. So the money you may spend to get that second pair of eyes on your plan, in my opinion, is very well spent. Between my own planning, the software, the what if scenarios, the Monte Carlo testing, and the outside review from financial planners, that is what finally helped me shake the fear enough to take the leap to retire early. Layer four is understanding that retirement spending is not a straight line. Before retirement, I modeled spending like a lot of people do. You pick an annual number, you adjust it for inflation, then project it forward year after year like retirement is a perfectly smooth sidewalk. That is useful for planning. You need assumptions, but actual retirement is not anywhere that smooth. Some years cost more, some years cost less. Early retirement can be just as expensive as working and sometimes more expensive because now you actually have time to do things in the years while you're still young enough and healthy. And that's the stage I'm in now. So, am I spending dramatically less when I was working? No, I'm mostly living the same lifestyle. And in some areas, I may spend a little more because I have time to travel, do projects, and enjoy the years I was working so hard to reach. Later, that may change. In my elderly years, life is gonna slow down. Travel and projects will slow down as I may not have the energy or move as good anymore. Of course, healthcare could go the other way, so I'm not pretending later retirement is automatically cheaper. But the point is, retirement spending is not one clean, straight line. And that matters because if you assume every dollar spending must continue forever at the same level, you might scare yourself into working longer than necessary because you're afraid of running out of money. But if you assume spending will magically drop and stay low, you may fool yourself in the other direction. The better question is, can my plan handle real spending patterns? Can it handle higher spending in the early years? Can it handle a year where a major house repair shows up? Can it handle a few years where we travel more? That's the layer I'm talking about, not pretending spending is low, not pretending spending is fixed, but building a plan that can handle the fact that spending changes throughout retirement. And that's why the 4% rule doesn't quite work, among other reasons. I'm sure you've heard of it. With the 4% rule, the basic idea is that if you retire with a diversified portfolio, you withdraw 4% in the first years, then increase the dollar amount for inflation each year. And historically, that had a very strong record of lasting 30 years. But the problem is, it assumes you're just withdrawing the same amount per year for retirement spending adjusted for inflation. But like I just said, retirement doesn't work like that. It's fine to use for generic ballpark of how big your nest egg might need to be, but it's not detailed enough. Another issue with it is it's built around a 30-year retirement. Since I retired early at 55, that only takes me to 85. My father has already lived past 85, so if I'm fortunate enough to live longer, I need the plan to go longer too. Another issue with it is that the 4% rule was built around surviving the bad historical scenarios. And that's the part that's easy to miss. It's a conservative withdrawal rate that was designed to survive the ugliest cases. And in many historical scenarios, retirees who followed a conservative withdrawal approach did not just avoid running out of money, they ended up with more money, sometimes a lot more. Michael Kitces has written about this. He's a well known retirement planning researcher, writer, and educator whose work is widely followed by financial advisors. And one of the things he said that really stuck with me is that when retirees followed the 4% rule over the historical 30-year periods he analyzed, over two-thirds of the time they finished with more than double their starting wealth, and half the time they nearly tripled it. And more than 90% of the time they finished with more than their starting principal after 30 years. That's wild when you think about it, because most of us are terrified of the disaster scenario of running out of money at 82 and having to go back to work. And don't get me wrong, we need to plan to avoid the disaster scenario. But there's another risk too, that we spend the healthiest years of our retirement not spending and enjoying it like we should. So instead of treating a withdrawal rate like a fixed commandment like the 4% rule does, I think about retirement spending more like a gas pedal. If markets are terrible, I can let up on the gas. If markets are strong and the plan improves, maybe I can press the gas a little more. Not recklessly, but also not fearing and regretting not doing things I could have in my healthy and energetic go go years. Layer 5 is planning healthcare and taxes together. This is where early retirement is very different from a more traditional retirement. If you retire at 65, you're usually going straight into Medicare. But if you retire early, like I did, you may have several years where health insurance is one of the biggest swing costs in your retirement plan. And that is why I consider this a real layer of protection, because if I can avoid accidentally making healthcare more expensive than it needs to be, less money has to come out of my portfolio, more money can stay invested, and my cash runway lasts longer should I pull from that to pay expensive premiums. So this is not just about saving a few dollars on premiums. It helps protect the whole retirement plan. Because here's where a lot of people planning for early retirement are surprised. If you are using the Affordable Care Act marketplace before Medicare for health insurance, the subsidy is not based on how much money you have sitting in your portfolio. It's based on your household income for the year. More specifically, it's based on your modified adjusted gross income or MAGI. And for 2026, under the current rules, to qualify for any premium tax credits or subsidies, Your household income generally needs to be between 100% and 400% of the federal poverty level or FPL for your household size. And I'll put a table in the description or the show notes from the Department of Health and Human Services so you can see what that looks like by household size. But the big idea is this: in early retirement, your portfolio balance does not directly determine whether you qualify for Affordable Care Act subsidies. Your MAGI does. And that is why the accounts you draw from matter so much, because 50,000 of spending is not always 50,000 of MAGI. If I pull money from a traditional IRA or traditional 401k or 403b, that generally creates taxable income, and that income counts towards MAGI. If I sell investments in a taxable brokerage account, I do not pay tax on the money I originally invested, which is my basis. The gain is what can increase my MAGI, and dividends and interest in that account can increase it too. If I spend from cash, that does not increase MAGI. If I take money from a Roth IRA, qualified withdrawals generally do not create taxable income or increase MAGI. And if I do a Roth conversion, that can be a great long term tax move in some cases, but it can also push up my MAGI for the year. So the question is not just, do I have enough money to spend? The question is, where should the money come from this year? That is the part that feels very different once you are actually living early retirement. A withdrawal decision is not just a withdrawal decision. It can be a tax decision. It can be a healthcare decision. It can be a subsidy decision. And if I pull money from the wrong place at the wrong time, I may accidentally make health insurance much more expensive than it needed to be. And that extra cost has to come from somewhere. So the less I accidentally waste on taxes or inflated health insurance premiums, the less pressure I put on the portfolio. And the less pressure I put on the portfolio, the stronger the plan stays. Layer six is having backup levers. This is probably the biggest reason I don't worry about running out of money the way I used to. A fragile retirement plan has no levers. Everything has to go right. The market has to cooperate, spending has to behave, healthcare has to be reasonable, taxes have to stay friendly, and no major surprises are allowed. That is not a plan I would feel good about. A stronger retirement plan has options, and options are calming and calm that fear of running out of money. For any early retiree, those levers might include delaying Social Security, or claiming Social Security earlier if life changes, or managing withdrawals differently, or using more money from a taxable brokerage account in one year and less from pre tax retirement accounts in another year, or doing Roth conversions in some years and skipping them in others, or reducing travel for a year, or delaying a major expense or downsizing later, or working part time if that is something you actually want to do, or changing how aggressively you spend from the portfolio before Medicare or before Social Security starts. Not all of those apply to me, not all of them will apply to you. But the point is not that everyone has the same levers. The point is that you should know what yours are. When I think about running out of money, I'm not thinking, can nothing ever change? I'm thinking, if something changes, what can I change back? That's a much more useful question, and it makes retirement feel less like stepping off a cliff and more like driving a car with brakes, mirrors, and a steering wheel. Layer 7 is reviewing the plan without obsessing over it. This is another layer that helps me worry less. Retirement is not set it and forget it, but it also should not become a full time, anxiety filling job. I do not want to spend retirement refreshing account balances all the time and having it become almost like a hobby. That would not be fun. But I also don't want to ignore the plan. So I like the idea of revisiting the plan on a regular schedule, like quarterly. For me, that means looking at spending, portfolio performance, taxes, healthcare, cash reserves, and whether anything in life has changed. Am I spending more than expected? Is the cash runway still where I want it? Do I need to adjust anything before year end for taxes or Affordable Care Act income planning? Has the market changed the plan in a meaningful way? Do I need to refill a bucket? Do I need to slow spending? Can I safely spend a little more? That review process matters because it keeps the plan alive. A retirement plan is not a document you create once and then frame it on the wall. It's a living plan. And when you keep it updated, you can catch small issues before they become big ones, and much better than just hoping everything works out. Again, hope is not a plan. So when I put all these layers together, that is why I don't worry about running out of money the same way I used to. I worry less because I have layers around the risk. I know my spending floor. I have a cash runway. I stress tested the plan. I understand that spending changes over time. I'm not treating the 4% rule like a commandment. I'm planning healthcare and taxes together. I know my backup levers. I have flexibility, and I'm reviewing the plan periodically without obsessing over it all the time. That's the difference. Now, with all that said, am I totally over the fear of running out of money? No, not completely. But I think that's very normal. I'm not sure I'd ever be able to get rid of that fear completely, even though with solid planning, it's pretty much, for me, irrational. There is still a part of my brain that has a hard time going from saving money to spending it. I was the retirement planner and saver in our household. My wife trusted me with it, which I appreciate, but it also means I carried a lot of that responsibility. So when you spend decades building the pile, it does not always feel natural to start using from the pile. Your spreadsheets can say you're fine, your retirement planning software can say you're fine, your financial planners can say you're fine, but your nervous system still doesn't get the memo. That was me. I had done the planning, I had run the numbers, I had validated the plan, but there was still that nightmare scenario in the back of my mind. I remember seeing some television show or YouTube video at one point where the nightmare was basically someone much older, maybe in their 80s, running out of money and having to go back to work just to make ends meet. That stuck with me because that is not just a math problem. That is a loss of control problem. It's a dignity problem and a freedom problem. And it's honestly very scary to me. I do not want to run out of money. I want my wife and myself to be secure. Now, I don't think fear is automatically bad. Fear can be useful if it motivates you to build a stronger plan, as it did for me. Believe me, I'm doing everything I can to avoid that nightmare scenario. Fear can be useful if it motivates you to build a stronger plan, as it did for me. It can push you to know your spending, build a cash runway, stress test the plan, think through healthcare, understand your taxes, and get another set of eyes on your situation to make sure you didn't miss something. That is the productive use of fear. But fear becomes a problem when it keeps making decisions after the plan is already solid. That is when fear can become debilitating. It can keep people working years longer than they need to. It can keep people from spending money on experiences they can afford. It can make someone with a strong plan live as if they were always one bad month away from disaster. And that is not what I want, nor do you. So, yes, we need to protect against the bad scenarios, but we also need to be honest about the other risk. The risk of letting fear steal the best years of retirement, even when the plan is strong enough to support the life we said we wanted. That's the balance I'm trying to strike. Let the fear motivate the planning. Let it push you to build a solid, bendable plan. But once you have that plan, don't let fear be the only reason you keep delaying retirement. And don't let fear keep you from using the freedom you spent decades building. For me, retiring at 55 has taught me that confidence does not come from having a perfect plan. It comes from having a plan with layers, like I talked about in this episode. A plan that can survive imperfection, a plan that can bend without breaking. And if you are still working and trying to decide whether you can retire, I would not only ask, do I have enough money? I would also ask specific questions to make sure I also have a bendable plan to conquer that running out of money fear. Knowledge here is your best defense. And maybe the best question, what am I afraid of specifically? Because I'm afraid of running out of money is a big, vague fear. It can hang over everything, but once you get specific, you can plan and take action to get rid of that fear. If you are afraid of a market crash, well, build a cash runway. You should do this anyway, as this is usually a matter of when, not if. If you're afraid of healthcare costs, model the premiums and understand how it affects them. If you're afraid of taxes, build a withdrawal strategy. If you're afraid of overspending, separate your needs from your wants. If you're afraid of retiring too early, test the plan with different dates. The vague fear of running out of money creates paralysis. Specific fear creates an action plan. So when I say I don't worry about running out of money, I don't mean the thought never crosses my mind. I mean I have moved from fear to management. And for me, that's made all the difference because early retirement is not just about having enough money, it's about building enough confidence to actually use the freedom you bought. Thank you so much for listening. And until next time, take care and make the most of today.